For decades, there was one unbreakable rule in the personal computer industry. Windows was never a product you chose. It was simply there, pre-installed, silent, assumed, the invisible price of entry into owning a laptop at all. That rule just broke, and it broke in a way nobody saw coming. One of the biggest PC manufacturers on the planet has quietly flipped the entire relationship upside down. Windows is no longer the default. It is now the extra, the upsell. The thing you have to specifically ask for and specifically pay more to get. And on the other side of that decision sits Microsoft, watching one of its most important hardware partners walk away from 3 decades of assumed loyalty, right in the middle of the most turbulent year Windows has had in a very long time. So let's break down exactly what happened, why it happened now, and why Microsoft's own recent behavior may have made this decision almost inevitable. According to reporting that surfaced from inside the industry earlier this year, the manufacturer ran an extensive internal trial throughout 2025, testing Linux as a genuine, fully supported alternative operating system across a real slice of its consumer laptop lineup. This was not a tiny experiment buried in a lab somewhere. It was large enough and successful enough that the company made a permanent structural decision off the back of it. Linux became the new standard configuration. Windows became the thing you had to click an extra box for and pay an additional fee to receive. Think about what that actually signals. For 40 years, computer manufacturers built their entire consumer strategy around one assumption, that customers expected Windows, wanted Windows, and would feel confused or even cheated if it wasn't there. Flipping that assumption on its head is not a small marketing tweak. It is an admission that the calculus underneath the entire industry has changed. And the reasoning lines up with numbers that have been quietly circulating in hardware forums and industry publications for months. Every single Windows license costs a manufacturer a real, meaningful royalty fee paid directly to Microsoft, while Linux carries no licensing cost whatsoever. On top of that, Windows increasingly demands more expensive hardware just to run acceptably. Things like a TPM 2.0 security chip, and a minimum of 8 gigabytes of memory for the operating system to feel responsive, while Linux runs comfortably on far leaner and cheaper configurations, in some cases needing as little as 4 gigabytes to perform well. Multiply a savings of somewhere around $100 per unit, a figure that has been cited by people close to these internal trials, across tens of millions of laptops a year. You are looking at a cost difference large enough to fundamentally reshape a company's entire product strategy. There's also a customer experience angle that rarely gets enough attention. The same reporting describing this shift pointed to lower return rates, fewer support calls, and fewer complaints tied to bloatware and disruptive update cycles on the Linux configurations, compared to their Windows equivalents. Fewer returns and fewer support calls is not a soft, feel-good metric in this industry. It is a direct line, item on a profit and loss statement. And once a company has hard data proving that removing Windows makes customers happier and cheaper to support at the same time, walking that decision back becomes almost impossible to justify internally, no matter how much pressure comes from the other direction. Now here's where this story gets a second, sharper edge, because this shift did not happen in a vacuum. It landed in the middle of one of the most chaotic and confidence-shaking stretches Windows has experienced in years. Just weeks before reports of this pricing flip began spreading, Microsoft found itself at the center of an entirely different firestorm. One that started with what looked like the biggest Windows announcement in a decade and ended with the company publicly killing its own rumor in a single social media post. For most of the spring of 2026, the tech world was gripped by a single overwhelming narrative, that Windows 12 was finally coming, complete with leaked codenames, hardware partner documents, and teaser posts from Microsoft's own executives. It had every ingredient of a defining industry moment. And then, right as the anticipation peaked, Microsoft's own head of the Windows and Devices division posted a teaser image that appeared to confirm everything, only to immediately close the door in the very same breath, stating plainly that whatever was coming, it was not a new version of the operating system. The collapse of the Windows 12 rumor is not just a side story here. It is the exact backdrop that makes a major manufacturer demoting Windows to a paid extra feel less like an isolated business decision and more like a symptom of something much larger happening across the entire platform. By early March of 2026, a widely circulated report claimed that Windows 12, carrying an internal code name tied to a completely reworked modular architecture, was on track to ship later in the year, and that it would require a neural processing unit hitting a minimum AI performance threshold just to unlock the operating system's full feature set. The story spread everywhere within days because it had every ingredient people expect from a defining tech headline, a brand new operating system, a hardware cutoff threatening to leave existing machines behind, and rumors of a subscription model attached to premium AI features layered directly into the shell. It read like the natural next chapter of a narrative that had already dominated most of 2025, Microsoft pushing artificial intelligence deeper and deeper into Windows, this time by rebuilding the entire operating system around it from the ground up. But almost as quickly as the story spread, it began falling apart under its own weight. The outlet that originally broke the report eventually attached an editor's note admitting that a significant portion of the claims circulating were, in their own words, unfounded. Other trusted Microsoft-focused publications were considerably blunter, describing much of the subscription narrative specifically as recycled, AI-generated content that had repackaged older leaked engineering fragments and presented them as fresh breaking news. Even the supposed secret code name at the center of the story turned out to be a case of mistaken identity, a name that had actually already been used publicly for a Windows 11 feature update that shipped back in 2024, quietly recycled through the churn of social reposts and content farms until it looked like fresh evidence of an imminent new release. And yet, despite all of that unraveling, the hype refused to die down because Microsoft's own developer conference was scheduled for the first days of June, alongside one of the largest hardware trade shows in the world happening in the very same window. Then Microsoft did something that, in hindsight, poured direct fuel onto a fire that should have already been extinguished. Days before that developer conference opened, the president of Microsoft's Windows and Devices division posted a teaser image online showing what looked like a curved display edge, paired with cryptic language about a new era of personal computing. Given everything already circulating, a huge share of the tech world immediately assumed this was finally it, the Windows 12 reveal landing right on schedule. Except the same executive had already closed that exact door in the very same post, writing directly that something new was indeed coming for developers, but explicitly stating it was not a new operating system version, punctuating the line with a laughing emoji that read almost like he understood precisely how many headlines had already been written in anticipation of an announcement that was never going to happen. Multiple outlets covering the Windows ecosystem confirmed within hours that there would be no Windows 12 unveiling at that conference, and just like that, a rumor that had dominated tech coverage for the better part of 2 months was declared officially dead. But here is the part. Almost every piece of coverage got wrong by stopping there, because Microsoft did not simply deny a rumor and go quiet. In that exact same window, the company revealed precisely what was replacing the Windows 12 story in the real world, and it turned out to be genuinely significant, just not in the shape anyone had been trained to expect. Reports citing Reuters confirmed that Microsoft and NVIDIA were preparing to unveil the first wave of Windows machines built around an entirely new NVIDIA-designed processor, reportedly pairing a 20-core ARM-based chip with RTX-class integrated graphics, positioned as a direct challenger to the Snapdragon chips that have carried Windows on ARM largely alone for the past 2 years. Days later, Microsoft made it official, unveiling a flagship Surface device built from the ground up around this new silicon platform, described by Microsoft's own product leadership as the most performance-oriented Surface the company has ever built, with configurations reportedly reaching well over 100 gigabytes of memory. And design wins for this new chip were reportedly secured across nearly the entire PC hardware ecosystem, including the very same manufacturers now openly experimenting with Linux as their default operating system instead of Windows. Sit with that contradiction for a second, because it captures exactly where the industry stands right now. The same companies quietly demoting Windows to a paid add-on are simultaneously signing on to build next-generation Windows hardware around NVIDIA's new chip. That is not confusion. That is hedging. It is manufacturers refusing to bet their entire consumer strategy on either direction, building Linux configurations to capture the customers walking away from Windows fatigue, while still building premium Windows machines to capture the customers chasing a genuine performance gains. Layered on top of all of this, Microsoft confirmed that the next major Windows 11 update, arriving in the second half of 2026, would carry the single biggest interface change to the platform's core shell in over a decade, finally allowing users to move the taskbar away from the bottom of the screen after 3 straight decades of it being permanently locked in place. A small detail on paper, but one that tells you something important about Microsoft's actual state of mind right now. A company quietly listening to years of user frustration rather than continuing to dictate the experience from above. And that shift in posture is exactly what we need to unpack next. Because understanding why Microsoft is suddenly playing defense on so many fronts at once is the key to understanding why a major hardware partner felt confident enough to demote Windows in the first place. Because Microsoft's defensive posture across 2026 did not appear out of nowhere. It is the direct result of a string of self-inflicted wounds that piled up across 2025 and into this year, wounds significant enough that even the company's own most trusted hardware partners started openly hedging their bets, rather than continuing to defend Windows unconditionally. The clearest example of this arrived through Microsoft's own flagship artificial intelligence feature for Windows 11, a tool called Recall, which was originally supposed to be the single biggest reason anyone needed to buy a new AI-capable laptop in the first place. The pitch behind it sounded genuinely compelling on paper. Your computer would develop something close to a perfect memory, capturing everything you had ever done on it, so you could simply ask what you were working on last week and instantly retrieve a complete searchable timeline. Microsoft framed it as nothing less than a new era of personal computing, the exact justification manufacturers needed to convince customers that their perfectly functional existing laptop was now behind the times. But when security researchers actually examined how the feature worked underneath the surface, what they found spread through the security community almost overnight. To build that perfect memory, Recall was capturing a screenshot of the entire screen every few seconds, continuously in the background, without requiring explicit confirmation in the moment. Every email, every message, every password visible on screen, every banking session, every private conversation, quietly captured and stored in a local database sitting directly on the device. In the earliest version researchers examined, that database was not properly secured, and one independent researcher demonstrated a tool capable of extracting the entire contents in under 2 minutes, with nothing more than basic access to the machine. Microsoft responded the way most companies do when caught flat-footed, adding encryption, making the feature opt-in rather than automatic, and introducing filters meant to keep sensitive material like banking pages out of the captured images. Those changes mattered, but the underlying architecture never actually changed. The machine was still designed to photograph the screen constantly and organize an entire digital history into one searchable place, just with more security layers wrapped around the same core idea. And security layers reduce risk without ever eliminating it, since encryption tied to a simple login code is only ever as strong as that. Code and malware sitting on a compromised machine does not need to break any encryption if it can simply read what appears on screen before Recall ever stores it. Beyond the purely technical vulnerabilities, something more fundamental was happening. People simply did not want it, even secured, even entirely optional, because the underlying awareness that a computer might be silently photographing everything happening on screen created a discomfort no amount of engineering reassurance could talk people out of. This is the exact environment one of Microsoft's most important hardware partners walked into at a major industry showcase earlier this year, and what that company said on stage should have made headlines everywhere. It did not. Executives stated directly that the messaging around their newest laptops was deliberately no longer built around artificial intelligence first, a sharp reversal from the previous year's strategy of rebranding entire product lines specifically around AI capability. One executive went further, stating plainly that consumers are simply not buying computers based on AI capabilities, adding that artificial intelligence probably confuses people more than it actually helps them understand what a product does for them in practice. That admission was not some small aside from a minor player. It came from a company that manufactures the physical machines Windows runs on, standing in front of investors, journalists, and direct competitors, effectively conceding that the entire industry-wide AI PC strategy of the past 2 years was not landing the way it was supposed to with real, everyday buyers. And that is precisely the environment in which a decision to demote Windows itself, not just AI features, but the base operating system from default to paid extra, starts to make complete sense rather than looking like some reckless outlier move. If your own customers are telling you through returns data, support call volume, and satisfaction scores that they are happier and cheaper to serve without your primary software partner's product installed by default, and if that same software partner just spent the better part of 2 years pushing a flagship feature that alarmed security researchers and confused the very customers it was meant to excite, the math stops being a difficult decision and starts becoming an obvious one. There is also a deeper structural layer running underneath all of this that connects directly back to the Windows 12 saga from the previous section. Reporting suggests Microsoft is reportedly holding the Windows 12 name in reserve specifically as a contingency, a fresh start it can reach for only if Windows 11's damaged reputation cannot be repaired through incremental updates alone, rather than a scheduled product with a fixed release date. That detail matters enormously here, because it tells you Microsoft itself is not fully confident that its current fundamentals-first approach, rebuilding trust through interface changes and quieter defaults rather than flashy new branding, is actually going to work. And when the company controlling the operating system is privately hedging on its own platform's future, it becomes far easier to understand why the companies building the physical hardware around that platform are hedging right alongside it, building Linux configurations as insurance against a Windows relationship that increasingly feels less certain than it has in 3 decades. In the final section, I want to bring every one of these threads together and show you exactly where this leaves you as someone about to buy your next laptop. Because the choices manufacturers are quietly making right now are going to directly shape what shows up on store shelves for years to come. Because everything we have walked through so far is not a collection of unrelated headlines. It is one coordinated picture of an industry quietly repositioning itself while its biggest software partner works overtime. Just to hold on to trust it used to take completely for granted. You have a major manufacturer flipping the default operating system away from Windows for the first time in the company's history, backed by real internal data showing lower returns, fewer support calls, and meaningful per-unit cost savings. You have that decision landing in the immediate aftermath of Microsoft publicly killing its own Windows 12 rumor, days before the moment the entire industry expected it, replacing that narrative instead with a new NVIDIA hardware partnership and the biggest structural interface change to Windows in over a decade. And you have the deeper reason underneath all of it, a flagship AI feature that alarmed security. Researchers, confused ordinary customers, and pushed even Microsoft's most important hardware partners into publicly admitting that the entire AI PC strategy of the past 2 years failed to resonate with the people actually buying these machines. None of this means Windows is finished, and it would be dishonest to suggest otherwise. The Windows ecosystem still underpins enterprise software, corporate infrastructure, and legacy business systems worth an almost incomprehensible amount of money globally. And that kind of entrenched dependency does not unwind over a single product cycle, no matter how many hardware partners start hedging their bets. Microsoft is also actively rebuilding trust in real time rather than sitting still, and the changes coming in the next major Windows 11 update genuinely do respond to years of accumulated user frustration rather than ignoring it. But here is what this specific moment reveals that is genuinely different from anything the platform has faced before. For the first time in 3 decades, the manufacturers who build the actual hardware are no longer treating Windows as a fixed, non-negotiable cost of doing business. They are treating it as one option among several, weighed against real data about customer satisfaction, real savings on licensing and hardware requirements, and a real, measurable erosion of goodwill following the AI feature controversies of the past 2 years. That shift in mindset, manufacturers negotiating from a position of leverage rather than obligation, is the actual headline here, far more than any single pricing decision on its own. It tells you Microsoft can no longer assume unconditional loyalty from the very companies whose sales have defined its consumer dominance for 40 straight years. And once that assumption breaks, even partially, the entire relationship starts operating under different rules going forward. So what does this actually mean for you if you are in the market for a new laptop over the next year? It means the machine you eventually buy may increasingly ask you to make a choice you never used to have to think about, whether you want to pay extra specifically for Windows or accept a leaner, faster, ad-free Linux configuration that manufacturers are increasingly finding their customers prefer once they actually try it. It means watching closely how Microsoft's next major Windows update lands, because if the fundamentals-first approach genuinely repairs the trust lost over the past 2 years, expect hardware partners to quietly walk this pricing experiment back. But if update failures, confusing AI integrations, or further privacy controversies continue piling up the way they did through 2025, do not be surprised if more manufacturers follow the same path, and do not be surprised if the reserved Windows 12 name eventually resurfaces, not as a scheduled feature release, but as a full rebrand meant to give a damaged product a clean slate. History has shown again and again that dominant technology platforms rarely collapse suddenly. They erode gradually, one shifting incentive at a time, until the transition has already happened before most people even realized it was underway. Mainframes once seemed permanent until personal computers arrived. The personal computer itself once seemed unshakable until smartphones rewired how billions of people use technology every single day. Nobody sitting inside those transitions predicted exactly how fast they would unfold. They only looked inevitable looking backward, once the shift had already completed itself. Right now, heading through the second half of 2026, the signals coming out of the PC industry look remarkably similar to the earliest stages of exactly that kind of gradual transition. Not a dramatic overnight collapse, but a slow, deliberate rebalancing of leverage between the company that makes the software and the companies that build the machines it runs on. So here is the question worth sitting with. If your next laptop arrived with Windows quietly moved behind a paywall and a fast, clean Linux experience sitting there as the default instead, would you pay extra to keep the operating system you have always known, or would you finally make the switch everyone keeps talking about? Drop your honest answer in the comments, because manufacturers are not asking this question hypothetically anymore. They are actively building their entire 2026 and 2027 product strategy around how you answer it. If this breakdown gave you a clearer picture of what is actually happening beneath the surface of this story, hit that like button before you go. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need to see exactly this kind of reporting before it becomes mainstream news. Subscribe if you have not already. Share this with anyone, still assuming Windows will always just be there by default. And I will see you in the next one.